Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 2020 Multidisciplinary Conference on the dialogue between sciences and arts, religion and education. My paper, entitled Some Aspects of the Controversial Nexus Between Science and Religion. It is a sheer fact of history that the dialogue between theology and science became a common topic for academic discussions within the last 30 to 40 years. One can raise a naive question on whether this dialogue has succeeded so far. Has it achieved certain results which have had impact on both science and theology? In a wider context, one must admit that all discussions about whether science and theology are in conflict or in a sort of peaceful coexistence do not have serious existential implications. The problem remains, and its ongoing presence points to something which is basic and unavoidable in the overall human condition. In this manner, the two research camps have long been in irreconcilable antagonistic positions, very few bridges spanning between them. The more important are the historical considerations. In the conflict between the two domains of knowledge are the philosophical obstacles, especially the epistemological ones, which religion and theology pose to the skeptics of science. The main problem is that religious ideas seem not to be experimentally tested. In other words, they apparently escape the rigors of public scrutiny, while science always obeys the ideas of an open experimentation. Even empirical research shows that a scientific hypothesis is wrong, science puts it aside and looks for alternatives, subjecting them to the same rigorous verification process. But can we do the same thing with religious teaching? Theists, for example, continue to believe in God, no matter what they observe around them, including enormous suffering and evil. The followers of scientific skepticism say that religion does not have the solid probability of science. The God hypothesis, for example, seems to be totally out of any falsification, so it cannot be accepted by the courthouse of science. On the other hand, within the many debates among the representatives of the two paradigms of knowledge, there have been several important names of philosophers of science or physicists who have pleaded for the Christian origin of modern science. One, first chapter, warfare and non-warfare models of interaction between science and religion. In the last 2 decades, or even more, headlines screams the conflict thesis, God versus science, and religion and science will always clash. Sam Harris, in his Science Must Destroy Religion, writes, the conflict between science and religion is inherent. According to the conflict thesis, as science fills the cup of reason, irrational religion spills out. When the cup of reason is finally full, religion will have disappeared, evaporated. Despite being widely held, the conflict thesis has been rejected by historians, philosophers, and scientists. For example, when we look at the scientific revolution, the place where science, as most of us know, it began, we discover that the scientists involved, people like Copernicus, Galileo, Robert Boyle, and Sir Isaac Newton, were deeply and sincerely religious. Modern science sprang from religious believers and religious belief. Not only were these early scientists religious, their religious beliefs motivated and even informed their pursuits of science. 3 key thinkers, Francis Bacon, Robert Boyle, and Isaac Newton, who exerted a profound influence on the new science, did not discard their religious démarche. Bacon considered the father of the modern scientific method, was not himself a scientist, yet he provided the philosophical foundation of the scientific revolution. Robert Boyle, the father of chemistry, put into practice the experimental philosophy advocated by Bacon. Isaac Newton, father of physics, was one of the greatest scientific thinkers of all time. But each of these thinkers was motivated in their scientific pursuits by their deeply held religious beliefs. Bacon, Boyle, and Newton were keenly attuned to the role their theological beliefs played in their investigation of nature. Though their hard work and brilliant insights, modern science was born. Far from being antagonistic towards science, their faith motivated and even informed the development of science. The religious beliefs of these early scientists provided a foundation, a God-created cosmos and a God-created mind for investigating nature. This investigation was carried out with the confidence that the world created by God is orderly and regular. By experimentation and observation, we can attain to an understanding of the created world. Science found fertile ground in the Christian West. As contemporary physicist Paul Davies reminds us, science began as an outgrowth of theology, and all scientists, whether atheists or theists, accept an essentially theological worldview. Science arose among natural philosophers who believed the world to be design of God. In their quest for scientia, a complete and full understanding of reality, they perused God's two books, Scripture and Nature, to learn the mind of God. Boyle regarded the activities of natural philosophers as intellectual worship of God. This is the theological worldview within which modern science blossomed. In other words, the warfare thesis, sometimes called the conflict model, is but one way to think of the relation of science to religion. The agenda of the field of science and religion is to find a non-warfare or cooperative pattern of interaction. At the beginning of the 21st century, 8 patterns of interaction are discernible, 4 fitting the warfare interpretation and 4 that embrace peaceful cooperation, if not integration. First is scientism. Shortly, religion is defeated in the war by ignoring it. Second, scientific imperialism. Here, religion is defeated in the war by conquering and colonizing it. 3. Ecclesiastical authoritarianism. Modern science clashes with religious dogma that is authoritatively supported by ecclesiastical faith, the Bible. 4. The battle over Darwinian evolution, very well known. 5th, the two languages. The notion that science speaks one language, the language of facts, and religion speaks a different language, the language of values, is the dominant non-warfare model. 6th, hypothetical consonance. It directs inquiry towards areas of correspondence between what can be said scientifically about the natural world and what can be said theologically about God's creation. 7, ethical overlap. And finally, the 8th, New Age spirituality. Synthetic spiritualities, such as those found in New Age movement, seek to construct a worldview that integrates and harmonizes science with religion. Whereas this final 4 model take us beyond conflict or warfare, the two-language view presumes independence, while hypothetical consonance, ethical overlap, and New Age spirituality seek a fuller integration. The second and main part of my paper is Christian revolution, mainly the doctrine on creation. The most revolutionary change that Christianity introduced into Greek cosmology was doctrine on creation. It was inherited by Christianity from the Old Testament, but the doctrine seemed to be so clear that it was necessary to introduce it only to pagans converted to Christianity. However, in the prologue to the fourth gospel, it is not difficult to identify concepts that penetrate more profoundly into the Old Testament doctrine on creation, independently of the profound theology of the prologue. The very fact that the Greek concept of logos, albeit Christianized, played a central role in its composition was of great significance for the process of the assimilation of Greek culture into Christianity. This doctrine was certainly a reaction against the Gnostic tenet that matter is the principle of evil. Many Christian writers objected to the view by claiming that even matter is the work of God. This doctrine was developed by Origen in his famous De Principiis, who strongly objected to the Platonic teaching on pre-existing matter and introduced the concept of creation out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo, into Christian teaching. However, the full elaboration of the idea of creation belongs to St. Augustine. The doctrine of creation was so new in comparison with Greek cosmology that it had to raise new questions and make radical modifications, especially with regard to the understanding of space and time. Origen had asked the question, what did God do before the beginning of the world? Augustine supplemented it with another question, where was he before heaven and earth came into being? He argues that all speculations about space and time before the creation of the world are meaningless, since no space and time utterances can refer to God. Augustine, relying on Aristotle's physics, claimed that there is no time without motion, and there is no motion before the beginning of the world and after its end. Therefore, he argued the creation doctrine compels us to accept that God created the world once with space and with time, that God himself does not exist in any infinite time and in an infinite space, but exists in eternity. That means beyond space and time. There is another aspect of the time problem that created interest among some of the Christian fathers. In the Greek tradition, time was conceived of as a closed circle. Plato held this view and claimed that circular time is the closest image of eternity. Now, the fathers of the church, who have most influenced the Orthodox tradition, were happy to use the science and philosophy of their time in their theological thinking. They did not pursue a natural theology in the sense in which that term is often now understood, based on scholastic and later developments in Western theology. According to the Orthodox understanding, the intellect provides not knowledge about the creation, but rather a direct apprehension or spiritual perception of the divine logos, divine word incarnate in Christ, and of the inner essences or principles, logoi, of the components of the cosmos created by that logos. In the Orthodox understanding of these logoi, all the nuances of the Greek term logos come into play. As Father Andrew Love has expressed it, to say that the universe is created by the logos entails, for the speaker of Greek, that the universe has a meaning, both as a whole and in each of its parts. That meaning is logos. Everything that exists has its own logos, and that logos is derived from God, the logos. Because the world is seen as having been created by God through his logos, it could no longer be regarded as a pale reflection of the eternal reality as in Plato's world. In Eastern Fathers' approach, the world is a structure in which vastly incommensurate elements, angelic, human, animate, and inanimate, are all held together and function as a coherent whole focused on their creator. God is at once totally other das ganz andere, as we know from Rudolf Otto. Totally beyond everything that is, and in everything by the ecstatic power, inseparable from himself. The sense of God being in everything, and yet totally other, takes up an antinomy that is found at least as early as the work of Saint Athanasius, for whom God has no affinity with the world in his essence, but his powers pervades the whole cosmos. This understanding, sometimes known as panentheism, all in God, is very different from that of mainstream philosophical theism of the Christian West, in which God is usually seen entirely separate from the world. Orthodox panentheism has been expressed in two related ways. One has been to stress the notion of the logoi of created things. This is especially the case in the work of Saint Maxim the Confessor, according to whom Christ, the created Logos, has implanted in every created thing a characteristic Logos, a thought or word, which is God's intention for that thing. This view of the relationship between the creation and its divine creator never falls into pantheism, the identification of God with the world, because the characteristic Orthodox stress on God's immanence is balanced by an equally strong stress on the utter transcendence of the divine essence, which is seen as unknowable and beyond all creaturely participation. Because of this later stress, the Orthodox view, while panentheistic, is never pantheistic. At one end of the spectrum is the essentially anti-scientific attitude expressed by writers like Philip Sherrard and Father Seraphim Rose. The former of these fails to perceive any validity in the distinctions commonly made between technology and pure science, and between science and scientism. The latter, Seraphim Rose, effectively defends a kind of fundamentalism in relation to the patristic literature. For both of these proponents of an anti-science attitude, the positive assessment of science implicit in the mainstream Western dialogue between science and theology represents an unacceptable dilution of Christian theology. At the other end of the spectrum lie writers such as Basarab Nicolescu and Christopher Knight. These, while insisting that Orthodox perspective have an important role to play in the science-theology dialogue of the future, do not reject the Western dialogue of the last half century with its positive attitude to science and its view that science insights provide genuine insights into major theological themes. The issue of the origin of the world was one of the most controversial chapters in the dispute between science and religion, for it was reduced until recently to the confrontation between two theories, creationism and evolutionism, the latter claiming the scientific nature. But whether it's creationism or evolutionism, both theories disregard the presence and continued work of God in creation. In terms of philosophical and religious point of view, creationists are rather deists because they consider God being transcendentally isolated, while evolutionists lean more towards pantheism, believing that the world exists from eternity. Conclusion. In the age of science, can we honestly believe that the universe has any purpose? Is it credible to claim that something of everlasting importance is working itself out in the universe? Of all the questions in science and religion, many thinkers believe the most fundamental is whether the universe has a purpose. Nowadays, many scientifically educated people are quite certain that the universe can have no overarching purpose, since science predicts that it is heading irreversibly towards a decisive final death at some point in the future. This, of course, is not how religions, especially the Judeo-Christian traditions, see things. They have no trouble agreeing that everything physical, including our own bodily existence and the universe that sustains us, will perish. But they also believe in something eternal. Not everything, in other words, is subject to non-being. In order for anything to exist at all, theologians have argued there must be a creator, a being that is not capable of non-being. This being, believers have called God. Accordingly, the purpose of the universe is to disclose the infinite divine resourcefulness that gives being to all beings. Simply by existing and witnessing to the infinite creativity of God, the totality of beings is full of purpose. The scientific knowledge of the world, in the precise sense of the word, was developed in Greek antiquity. A change is taking place in modern times. With Galileo, physics becomes mathematical. Nature is considered according to an atomic and mechanical model. There is no internal purpose. Modern science is closely associated with a technique. It is an action by which man transforms his environment. More than significantly, the great positivist Austrian thinker of the 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, utters sententiously, "To believe in God means to see that the facts of the world are not the end of the matter. To believe in God means to see that life has a meaning." Over and above, all these endeavors from both sides of human to reaching at a better understanding of the reality we live in is so emphatically underscored by a Romanian-born French physicist, Basarab Nicolescu. Si la science et la religion acceptent de dialoguer, alors les aveugles verront et les sourds entendront. That is, if science and religion accept dialogue, then the blind will see and the deaf will hear. Thank you very much for your attention and for your patience. See you.